How did the change in my perception of the Supreme Council of the House of Jacob alter my life? How did my perspective change as I studied real history and as I learned more about the church? Well, if you want to know the answer to these questions, then strap in, put your helmet on. Let's go. Well, hello, ex-church community, and to all of you who took time out of your busy day to watch this video. Thank you. I appreciate your curiosity, and I hope everyone's doing well. Well, to all of you new viewers, welcome to my channel. I'm Ray, the Ex-HOJ. And to all of you returning viewers, thank you for coming back. I appreciate that. So, let me tell you, ex-church community, I had a busy past 3 weeks, and an interesting past 3 weeks. All the different conversations that I've had with people, and just hearing the different perspectives and listening and observing different perceptions of reality. And that's one of the things that I enjoy about having conversations with people, is because I enjoy hearing different perspectives. I mean, I enjoy hearing people's perception of reality, because we don't all have the same perception of reality. And our reality is based on the information that we have about our reality and how we understand that information. So, I can listen to people's view on things, whether we agree or not. Is not an issue for me, because I understand that everybody had their own perspective, and they have their own perception of reality. So, one of the reasons why I started this channel, and there are many reasons, but one of the reasons was, it occurred to me that during my 65 years in the Supreme Council of the House of Jacob, I had never been asked by anyone, and not that I needed anybody to ask me these questions. It was just one of those random thoughts that came to me, and it occurred to me that the 65 years that I had been a member, no one had ever asked me my thoughts about being a member of the Supreme Council of the House of Jacob. And I found that pretty interesting. I mean, because for me, looking back, it's kind of like, as long as you're doing all the required work, I'm saying, coming to church, paying your tithes, your church obligations, and you're being active in the church, pretty much you're considered a good member. I mean, now people might not know anything else about you, but as long as you're doing those things, then you're pretty much looked at as a good member. So nobody ever really asked you what your thoughts were about the church. I mean, how did you feel about the rules and regulations? What did you understand about the doctrine, and what did it mean in your life? What understanding did you have of it? They never asked those type of questions, and I just found that kind of interesting. because I said, wow, you could go your entire life and nobody would ever know how you really feel. So that's basically what I'm doing. I'm sharing my story to the ex-church community, excuse me, and to the world. But again, let me get back to the subject here. It's about perspective. It's about perception, your perception of reality. And using myself as an example. Now, as I told you in the first and the second episode, my perception and my perspective was based on the music. I'm saying my perspective of the church was simply based on the music, the traveling, and the socializing. And yes, I caught some things every now and then, but they were irrelevant to me because for me, they wasn't applicable to my life. I mean, I couldn't articulate it like that at the time, but that's the way I felt. So I just discarded what I didn't need. And so just being who I am, you know, I'm being true to me. So those were the things that I was interested in, and those were the things that shaped my perspective and shaped my perception of, and that was my reality of being a member in the Supreme Council of the House of Jacob. Now, that was a limited perspective, but that was all I had. That was all I needed at the time. That's why my perception of church was different. I didn't think the church was a strict institution, simply because I did what I wanted to do. So, I mean, the rules, I didn't give any thought to the rules while I was growing up, you know. So, for me, like I said, from my perspective, that was the way I saw the church. And that was all I needed at that time. Now, as I said, I think it was in episode 2, when you are presented with a different perspective, and your perspective and your perception is now broadening, because now you have information that you didn't have before. And now when you have to shift your reality from one state of consciousness, because where I was growing up, whereas when I was growing up, all the way up to 21, my perspective was very limited. Like I said, I didn't need anything else. But that's what it was. So now, when I move up to Minnesota, and I'm presented with this new perspective, and I'm in a new environment, mind you, then the challenge comes in trying to shift. So moving away from the reality that I knew to now gaining more information, and now I'm trying to move into this new reality. So for me, the shift, it wasn't an easy shift. So in the last episode, I left off talking about my diving into my research on King James. And I'm not going to get into all of it. I'll just share two things with you that I learned as I started studying the history of King James and the King James Bible. One of the things that I found out was that King James, well, this way it said in the book that he was, I'll just use the term that they use now. He was part of the LGBTQ community. And when I discovered that, that was interesting to me. And for me, I never had a problem with anybody's sexual preference, or, simply because it didn't have anything to do with me. I feel like every human being have a right to do what they do, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else, and as long as it's not forced on anybody else. You do whatever you want to do. But that wasn't my lifestyle, but I didn't condemn or criticize anybody else. When I found out that King James had same-sex relationships, and at the time, most churches was bashing that community. They was bashing that lifestyle. And, I heard it a lot, even in the house of Jacob. I don't know how many times I heard the old cliche or the old saying that God didn't make Adam and Steve, he made Adam and Eve. Or they reverse it and say God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve. And so, I thought that was very interesting, because I said to myself, wow, I wonder if they know that you're reading the Bible, man, you're bashing right now. You're bashing his lifestyle. So, when I'm talking about King James, I'm talking about King James politically. I'm talking about King James as a king, as a world leader in his time. And when I talk about, I'm talking about the things that he did. I could care less about his sexual preference and his sex life. That doesn't bother me. What I do care about is the political decisions that he made. I care about how they still affect us even to this day. But again, when I studied King James, and like I said, when I came upon his political, the things that he did during his reign or during his administration, as king. And now, a lot of people don't like Donald Trump, but if you knew about King James was far worse than Donald Trump. I'm talking historically. Look at King James' political history. And when you think back to when they was telling us about the pilgrims coming to this land, the pilgrims and the Puritans, well, King James was the king at that time when all of that started happening. It's no different than Vladimir Putin's invasion of the Ukraine. It was the same thing. They came to this land we now call America. They invaded it. They weren't invited, but this was all under King James's reign. And so, as well as the beginning of the British transatlantic slave trade, that started during his reign. The first enslaved Africans that came on a British ship in 1619, those were done under King James's reign. I didn't know it until I studied it. And all I do is try to share it. I'm not sharing it to hurt anybody or sharing it to destroy anybody's belief. I'm sharing it because it's actual history. So when I really started understanding who King James was, it really changed my perspective. Actually, it changed my perspective, even of the Bible, because now that I had discovered his political reasons for even bringing his own version of the Bible into existence, it makes political sense, especially if you're a monarch. So let me get to the continuation of my newfound interest in, trying to be a good minister. And while I was studying all the history, the world history, I was also studying the House of Jacob's literature. I was reading everything I could get my hands on. When I became a minister, I bought all the literature that they let me buy. I wanted every book if I could get it. And I think I got most of them. And because I wanted to know how the church worked. I wanted to know how they operated as a business and as a religious institution. So I wanted to learn the Constitution and bylaws. I wanted to know about the rituals and rites. I studied everything that I could, everything that the leaders wrote. I studied it. Like I said, I just dived into it because I wanted to know. I was interested in learning. And it was an interesting journey because I kind of juggled back and forth between the history and between what I was learning in the church and learning about the church. Even when I became a junior minister, like I said, I wanted to learn. So, I'm trying to be around the people that can teach me. Some of us young ministers with a bishop, we had an opportunity to stand and listen to a bishop, dispense some knowledge to us. That was a free education. So it wasn't that I wasn't trying to be no bishop. Listen, I'm a person like this. Titles and positions really have never meant anything to me in my life because I am who I am with or without a title. Anybody that I could gain some knowledge from, I would do that. But that's what young ministers do that are serious about wanting to be a good minister. I remember going down to our convocations and there was one room in one of the dorms. In the evening, they would sit in there and, this was like a Bible study for me, so you could stand there and listen to their conversation and they're discussing different scriptures and, giving their interpretation and everything. And a musician sitting in the presence of more experienced musicians, then I would say, they was having a jam session. I was learning stuff in a jam session. Well, that was the same thing that was going on in these sessions. They were having a Bible jam session. So I would sit there or stand at the door because everybody couldn't get in the room, but all of us young ministers that wanted to learn, we were standing there at the door trying to listen, trying to, get as much as we can, Some people even took notes. I started learning how the House of Jacob interprets scripture, because this was all new for me. So I'm learning and seeing how the interpretation of scripture is being done. They even taught us that, the scriptures had hundredfold meaning. So as I started really listening to different people preach, um, I noticed the variance and the different interpretations that were being used. The way I was taught up in Minnesota, uh, we were taught basically that a lot of the interpretation in the Bible is spiritual, or you should take it spiritually, which is it's really a religious word for you should take it allegorically. And so when I would listen to some people, I noticed that some preached it in the spiritual sense or with the spiritual interpretation. And then there was others that actually preached it literally, in a literal interpretation. And as I started noticing that, I was like, wow. And so I started to hear, some people described heaven, as a state of mind, which is the way I learned it. But then, I heard people in other congregations in other states, some of them, they was literally describing heaven as some place up in the sky. And I found that interesting, that you had two beliefs or two understandings within one religious organization. Oh, and then another thing, I mentioned in the last video that my wife and we got in Bible school. So Bible school was interesting to me simply because for me, like I said in previous videos, I love to learn. So I enjoyed the conversations that we had at the end of our Bible school lessons. My Bible school teacher was the pastor and the bishop's wife, and she was a very good teacher. We used to have these discussions at the end of our class after we said the lessons, and man, we would get into what the lesson meant to us, what we got out of the lessons. We would talk about the interpretation of different scriptures, what it meant to us, or how did we interpret it. And I really enjoyed that. But I remember there was one meeting we came back from, and our pastor let us know that we could no longer have those discussions, if they weren't being had in the presence of our pastor or our overseer. And so we might have had a few more after that, but they kind of died off. We just stopped having those kind of discussions. And mind you, at this time, and this I went through this from 1981. I mean, when I say I went through it, I was doing all my studying, all my in-depth studying, all my research and everything. I was doing all of that between 1981 all the way up to around 1998. But I was just learning all kinds of stuff. I mean, real history, digging into the history of our church, reading all the biographies, and mind you, I'm going through all of this while trying to even find some uniform House of Jacob belief in God. I'm doing all of this still without an established belief in God or in Jesus. By this time, I had a new pastor in Minneapolis. The first thing he said to us when he came there, he told us that he wasn't sent there to be our babysitter. He said all of us had grown up in the church and we know the rules and regulations. And I know one of the things he used to always tell us, or one of the things I learned from him, well, he always said, don't wait until you get to church to be fed. He said, learn how to feed yourself, because if you wait till you come to church, you might starve to death. Yes, he was a wise man. He was very knowledgeable and very well studied. And you could tell that just in his preaching and the information that he shared. And so ultimately what I was trying to get to is where did Christianity come from? And so I said, I'm gonna ask my pastor. He might know. And so I went to him one day and I asked him, I said, Bishop, do you know where Christianity come from? I said, I wanna know where Christianity come from. Do you know? And he just kind of smiled. And he said, he kind of leaned back in his chair. He said, well, Ray, if you want to know that, then you have to do some research on the Emperor Constantine, the Roman Emperor Constantine. And you have to study the council, start at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. I said, all right, and I wrote it down and everything. So he was the one that told me about the Roman Emperor Constantine and the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. And I pursued those studies. I pursued that information. And man, I studied that. And he told me that in 1989. And I studied all the way up until 1998. I was just diving into just Christianity and the Roman Empire. And man, by 1998, when I reached my conclusion of what I had, studied, and it took me that long because I was double checking and triple checking. And this was just really political history. And so as I saw what had happened in the political history of the Roman Empire, well, even starting from the Greek Empire, I'm talking about as far as Western Christianity, the Romanized Christianity that was passed down. But anyway, yes, I went on that journey from 1981 to 1998. And I was still constantly learning things about the church. I was still constantly learning things in history. Still learning different things about the King of England. Still learning different things about the Church of England. Still learning things about other denominations. I studied other denominations. Other movements. So it was a lot of things in history that brought us to where we are now. I share the history because I know there are other people out there like me that would enjoy learning some of the history. But anyway, we gonna end this video. And when we come back in the next episode, we gonna continue this journey through my life. And man, it only gets more interesting because all the studying that I did between 1981 all all the way up until 1998. And the conclusion that I came to, that was a pivotal moment in my life. Once again, that was a point in my life that changed my perspective and my perception of reality. So, until next time.